Hi, my name is Skipper Chong Warson, and I'm a design director in San Francisco. And you're listening to How This Works. Actually, that's not true. My name is Laura. Please join me this week on How This Works as we flip the script and I interview Skipper Chong Warson, your venerable host of How This Works. Hi, Skipper. Thank you for making the space and time to join me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for carving out the time yourself.
Let's start with pronouns. Mine are she and her. How do you like to be referred to?
I prefer he and him, please.
So, Skipper Chong Warson, who are you? Tell us a few things about yourself.
Well, I suppose we can start with what's normally read as part of the show intro. I am a design director in my work life, my full-time work life. Mm-hmm. I do live in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay.
We moved here about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now, having lived in New York City for a decade.
Do you miss New York?
Do I miss New York? I miss the idea of New York. When anyone has ever asked about New York City when we lived there, I would often say to them that everything that they've heard is 100% true and 100% false, because there's so many different nuances to one's experience of living in the most populated city in the United States. Mm-hmm. And it's also relative to where you are and what you do. So what might be happening in downtown Manhattan is going to be very different from where we lived on the Upper West Side and or in Upper Manhattan versus what was happening in Brooklyn.
Or Queens.
Or Queens or the Bronx.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I definitely miss the idea of it. I know our child misses it. Mm-hmm. Because having moved from New York just before the pandemic, the summer before the pandemic, they often say that they want to go back to New York, right? Yeah. That in their mind, New York was this perfect place where they were born, they were raised for the first few years of their life, and then we left. And then seemingly the world fell apart.
Right. And then they moved to California and everything fell apart.
That's right.
I miss New York. I miss it's funny. I've become a lot more, I don't feel like I've had for the last year and a half, I don't feel like I've had the luxury to think about anything other than what is happening right in front of me. Right. So in this past week, I've really been recalling our time in New York, and I really, really, really miss it. Yeah. There are a lot of things that I miss about living there. And there are a lot of things that I'm grateful for. Yeah. So I feel you on that.
What's one thing that you miss about New York, just to pull something out?
I miss the walking culture.
Yeah.
I miss being able that my body was my transportation, that I could either walk or jump on a train or bus so easily and seamlessly. And even though, as we lived there, New York had become the largest, the most populous it had ever been. So,
definitely swelled in people numbers.
It did. And so, the trains were delayed sometimes. Everyone complains about the
sometimes.
Trains. Yeah, that's true. Everyone
train would pull into the station and you see the crowded car. People would step out just to let other people have room to step off.
Yeah.
And you think, or I would think sometimes, do I really want to cram myself into that tin of sardines?
And then when you wait for the second train and it's crammed, and by the time the third train comes and it's still crammed, you're like, all right, well, I'm getting on it this time.
I have to get on it
or I'm going to walk 40 blocks. That's fine. I'm also sometimes in the mood to walk 40 blocks, so it's fine.
Right.
Yeah, I miss that. I miss the walkability of that.
Yeah.
I really miss the Natural History Museum because I spent so much time there with our child.
Yeah.
I really miss it. And I miss the availability of... Because I know that someone from the Bay Area was if I say I miss the availability of the culture that we had, well, the Bay Area has a lot of culture, and it does.
It does.
The museums, the ballet, the opera, we sort of took advantage of. We took advantage of a lot of underground theater and dance. And,
the theater scene, the musical theater scene.
Yeah, and dance. We have lots of friends who are in dance, and the things that we saw and did, and that we ourselves performed in public parks in New York. I miss a lot of that.
Yeah.
Would I pack up and move back there right this moment? I don't know that I would pack up and move anywhere right this moment, because the idea of packing and I just need to get through lunch today. But yeah. Right. All right. So you moved here a year and a half ago. We did. I guess I was with you when that happened. That was cool.
Yeah.
We took a drive across country.
We drove across country, saw some parts of the country that we'd never seen before. And my background, just to say one more thing about who I am, my college degree is actually not in design. That's not what I studied in school.
What did you study in school?
I have a double major, and one's in English literature and one's in playwriting. And what was interesting is that while I studied writing, I attempted to do the least amount of writing possible. In that, I mean, I did all of my coursework, I turned in all the things I was meant to do, but I didn't want to do any extra work in writing. I wanted to write as little as possible.
Then why did you get a degree?
Hold on. So for my work studies and my other occupational things that I did during the time that I was at university, I actually did design work. So by the time I graduated from university, I had as strong a writing portfolio as I did a design portfolio. And so I didn't want that to be the only muscle that I was flexing. So the way that I often give the example is that I believe that design and writing are both about storytelling. One is about writing the story, constructing the story from words, but then design is another way to tell the story, albeit more visually focused. The way the things are laid out, the flow of text blocks from here to there. Even in our more modern business context, how you might present something to a client or an internal stakeholder or someone on your team. How do you, quote unquote, sell them or tell them a compelling story around an idea?
I have like a flood of questions happening in my head right now. Let me see if I can. So do you feel, so you've sort of always been in a creative mode. Obviously your degree is creative. What you do now is creative. Did you know, it's really hard to ask this question because I know for myself, and I know for anyone listening, it's very difficult to think back to when you're 18 and what you what you imagined.
Sure.
Because this is not, I'm sure, for either one of us what we imagined. This is beautiful. I'm happy to be here with you. Let me say that. However, this is not the trajectory that I saw myself going in.
If you would have asked me at 17, 18 where I thought I was going to be, it probably doesn't match up to where I am today. Mm-hmm. And that's not a complaint. That's more of a compliment of how life throws a series of twists and turns. And as a human being in the world, you adjust and you change.
My larger question is, did you always know that you had a creative spirit inside of you and that you wanted to follow something that felt more artistic? So storytelling, you can do it visually, you can do it with the written word. So you wanted to, did you feel compelled you could do it in all kinds of media and filmmaking, et cetera?
Sure.
So did you know in your heart that you wanted to follow a creative path?
I think so. Growing up, I was a voracious reader, but I didn't do much in the way of extracurricular writing until probably middle school or high school. I don't know that I was super artistic in the way that some people talk about drawing all the time or painting all the time or whatever that medium is for them. I do remember in a 7th grade art class that we were doing figure drawing, and I thought, and it was the very typical, there was a sphere and there was a pyramid and then a rectangle, and you were supposed to draw the shapes and then also shade them. And I remember that first class really struggling to accurately capture what I was seeing in the scene in front of me. And the next day I brought to school a compass and a ruler to make the straight lines. And immediately my art teacher at the time said, no, that's not how you have to just draw it the way that you see it. And I said, but they're not straight. The way that I'm drawing it, and I showed her my previous attempts, the way that I'm drawing it doesn't look like that. And she said, well, you have to keep working at it. It's not about using a perfect circle shape or using a straight line. And I think that was a lesson for me in you can't do the thing perfectly, no matter what the tool is that you have, that it's always going to require work and iteration and cycles.
Mm-hmm. That's the beauty of that, though. People, if you take out the iterative process, then you lose so much of the joy of that creation, whether it's a photo or a painting or a play, or then you lose that if you try to just perfect every step of the way. That's not interesting.
Yeah.
That's not compelling.
Although there are moments that have been documented around someone going in, like Black Sabbath, when they went in to record their first album. Allegedly, they came in and recorded everything on the first take, just straight through. And I think what I heard is that it was all done in one day. And now that doesn't take into account the fact that the members of Black Sabbath already knew how to play their instruments. There was a lot of pre-work that happened before they ever walked into the studio.
They
knew how to play together.
They creatively collaborated many times.
That's right.
So that's still an iterative process.
Exactly. Yeah. And while they did have a magical moment in creating the tracks for their debut album, even that seems so stupendous and amazing. The fact that they were able to walk in and do it all in one take, in one day, and just have this thing that sometimes takes bands or a single person days, if not weeks, if not years to create.
So you're a design director. Mm-hmm. You live in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. What else do you do? What else would we know about you? You're the host of How This Works.
I am the host of How This Works.
Welcome.
What a lovely podcast this is. Thank you.
Yes, welcome. There's also a Barbie house there if you want to play with it.
Oh, yes. We're not including a visual, but we are recording in our child's room. So we are surrounded by a tiny bed and all sorts of toys.
Lots of stuffies.
Lots of.
If you get nervous while I'm asking these questions, grab your favorite stuffy and, feel the comfort. There's a cheetah close to you. So
cheetah. I see Cozy Rosie's next to you.
Yeah,
so.
There's a sloth.
Yeah.
There's a giant tiger.
That's right.
Multiple choices.
So last year I thought to start a podcast. And it's not as though I didn't have...
Along with many other people who had a lot more time in their home space.
Sure.
Yeah.
Many other pandemic projects. Mm-hmm. And it's not as though I'd never created a podcast before. Now to do the marketing piece and the planning piece and to be very regular about it, that was something that was new to me. At a previous employer, I had created an internal podcast, and then I helped work on their public-facing podcast. So I did have some experience in recording, scripting questions, even some of the producing side, editing. But I have to say that making a podcast that is a thing that exists out in public, that becomes something that some amount of people will know you for, it's nerve-wracking in a way. And one of the things that you know about me as my wife is that I can be very literal.
Newsflash, I am Skipper's wife.
For those people who didn't know, is that I can be very literal about things. So in sketching out the initial version of this podcast, I thought, we'll set a goal for it. We'll talk to 100 people about things that they know. And I know that's generally a podcast formula. It's not a novel approach to a podcast, but I did want to box it for myself. So that way, I had something that I was aiming for, but yet gave me enough flexibility to find out about people and subject matters that I didn't necessarily know about. And I also had indicated that it was going to be weekly. So that's one thing that I've struggled with, is because there will be weeks where things fall off, guests don't get scheduled in an expedient manner, schedules fall apart, all sorts of things happen. And some weeks there isn't a new episode that's available. So that's one thing that I've struggled with, is delivering on the promise that I've made in creating this podcast, but then also being easy on myself as a creator, producer, etc.
Because you are very literal. You do want to deliver weekly.
That's true. That's what I said.
Being literal, when he uses the word literal, it is an understatement. WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. So what's something so far in the short tenure of this podcast, what is a valuable lesson that you've learned in speaking to all the people that you've spoken to thus far?
I think one of the things that I have come to realize is that for the most part, people don't truly grok what it is that they know until they are sharing it with someone else. So this is something that I uncovered when I created the internal podcast when I worked at Fjord. It was called Design Voices. But what I was interested in is finding out more from my peers, the junior designers, even some other folks who weren't necessarily as loud as some of the senior or leadership folks within the office. So it was about talking to other designers in other disciplines. So not just the visual designers, but also the interactive designers or the business designers, our research folks, just getting a sense of who they were and what are the things that they knew about, right? So it was meant to be shining a light on maybe some of those people you didn't hear from normally. And 9 times out of 10, when I would approach someone, even if they had worked in a discipline of, let's say, user research or prototyping or biz dev, data and design, they would always say to me, I don't know why you want to talk to me about this. I don't know enough about it. So I feel like people are perpetually cutting themselves short to say, well, and being humble, I think, is a great trait. But I think too many times people underestimate the amount of information that they know or that might come out in a conversation saying, oh, can you tell me more about that? And really drawing out those things that people know, but they don't think they know.
Sure. I mean, imposter syndrome is ubiquitous in that way.
Yeah.
Even when someone is considered an expert in their field, most of the time they still feel like, oh, I have so much more to learn.
Right.
Because once you start navigating that, you realize like how much you don't know,
Right.
even in your own field, even in your own expertise.
Right.
That's a really nice way to frame that. I'm also curious, have there been any surprises in either something you've heard or have conversations, and as they do, as you just mentioned, conversations ebb and flow, and once someone starts opening up and speaking, it might take a direction that you don't expect.
Right.
Do you find that happens fairly often?
I think in every episode, something like that has happened. And one lesson that I am continuously learning as a result of making the podcast and putting it out in the world and being the person on the other side of the microphone is that more important than doing the research about that person, more important than having the right gear, listening is the most important piece of it.
Are you a good listener?
I'm an excellent listener.
Really?
Yes. Absolutely excellent. That's why when I listen back on all of the episodes, there's nothing ever missing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in listening back to some of the episodes, I have never said once, I can't believe I didn't ask this question. Mm-hmm. I think that I'm a listener with very good intentions. I'm sometimes distracted and I am not the best listener, but I am committed to being better.
Oh. Committed to change.
That's right.
Change for the better.
Improvement.
That's all we can hope for. This is something that you often ask at the beginning of your show. What is something that many people might not guess or know about you? Something obviously that you feel comfortable sharing. As a side note, like there is something I just learned about you the other day, which is often wonderful to think like you could spend X amount of years with someone and still not ever know everything about that person. It's the beauty of relationships.
What did you learn the other day?
I don't remember. I just remember thinking, oh, I didn't know that about you.
Touche.
I don't remember what it was. There was also something my mom said the other day, and I thought, oh, I didn't know that about you. I mean, it's great to learn. Yeah. So what is something that you feel comfortable sharing that most people might not know about you?
Sure. So I think one of the things that comes to mind the quickest is around my name. I say it at the top of every show. My name is Skipper Chong Warson, and that is true, and that has only been true since I was 7. Before that, when I was born, up until the age of 7, that was not my name. And when I was 7, I sat down and I made a list of all the names that I could possibly have. The list came down to Skipper or Daniel. And the reason why I picked Skipper over Daniel, and there's nothing wrong with the name Daniel. My grandfather's name was Daniel. One of my very best friends in the world's name is Daniel. But the reason I picked Skipper is because when I was born, I was named after my father and my great-grandfather, which their first names were Starr, Starr. And after growing up with a name like Starr, I didn't feel like I could be a Dan or a Danny or a Daniel. And so Skipper it was.
And why was your name changed?
So my father remarried, and my stepmother wanted to legally adopt me, even though she was under no obligation to do that. And part of legally adopting me, she had asked me, as I recall, if I liked my name. And I've heard this analogy from many people, but the idea of changing your name at 7, that maybe I should be glad that I didn't pick Bruce Wayne or Optimus Prime.
Optimus Prime is a fantastic name.
Optimus Prime would be a cool name.
And there are some cultures actually that roughly around that age, like a child comes into their own and they sort of choose their own name. You didn't grow up in a culture where that was part of that.
No, but there is a element of Korean culture where if you introduce yourself and you visually look more Korean than not, I suppose, often the question will be put to you, well, that's your American name.
Right. What is your Korean name?
What's your Korean name? And that often is given to children who are first generation so that they might assimilate, quote unquote, I'm doing finger quotes, more into American life.
So at this point now, so you have been legally Skipper for a fairly long time. Do you remember it being difficult when your name was changed to grow into that identity or to get used to people calling you by the name Skipper? Do you have a memory of that at all?
I don't really have a memory of that. My grandma Blanche, she sometimes would call me Starr still. There are some members of my mother's family who call me Starr because that's how they remember me.
Your birth mother's family.
My birth mother's family. And I have a dim memory of a teacher in the 3rd grade. So right after the name change happened, I think Mrs. Anderson had a copy of my old school records and they still had Starr on them. So those would be the only people that I really remember still calling me Starr. So much so that I really think of Starr as my father's name.
So when you hear the name Starr now, unless you're speaking to someone who calls you by that name, there's very little resonance within you.
It doesn't sound like my name.
Skipper sounds like your name.
Skipper sounds like my name.
It's a name you don't forget easily.
Yeah, I've only met one other person who, and in fact, they weren't the person. They knew someone whose real name was Skipper, but I've never met one-on-one another person whose name was Skipper. I didn't plan it that way, right? I didn't count on picking a unique name. I just thought Skipper sounded more in line with Starr than Daniel did. As much as maybe one of the arguments when I was 7 for changing my name from Starr was to get away from some of the teasing that happened in school on playgrounds. Things like, I remember there being a Starr bar, and with a name like Starr Warson, I got a ton of Star Wars jokes. But then
Star Wars is cool.
Star Wars is cool, but it doesn't matter how cool it is if you're being made fun of for it.
Yeah. And no one made fun of Skipper?
Well, I don't know that I thought through fully, brand name peanut butter, Barbie's sister. I think there's a dog food named Skipper.
Wait, the peanut butter is
Skippy, which I do not answer to Skippy.
No.
Generally speaking, I don't answer to Skip.
Yes, we've had a few people that there are some legacy people in your life, your sisters being two of them,
Right.
and your little brothers, I suppose, that call you Skip, and they're allowed to, their family.
Right.
We have two friends that call you Skip, they're legacy friends.
Right.
However, for people that call you Skip, I'm like, Skip is like a blonde 1950s dude who's like diving into the water. I was like, my husband is not Skip. Please don't ever call him Skip.
Although I do remember one of these friends is a mutual friend that we both have, a dear friend, Jim. And I remember when the notion of my coming to a party he was having, he said, yeah, sure, you can invite this guy Skip, but I'm not really into meeting a guy named Skip.
I don't need to know a dude named Skipper. Yeah.
That's right.
This is the man that married us.
That's right.
So Skipper feels like you don't have like a identity crisis. You feel like Skipper.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a fair statement.
And it's funny, in listening to you and thinking about Skip and Skipper, do you have a thing about that? Like when I've heard you introduce yourself and people might say, so Skip, and you're like, oh, no, it's Skipper. And you have a very generous spirit with that. Do you prefer to call people by their full names, or do you have people that you use shortened versions of their name? Like, do you have a feeling about that? Like shortening someone's name and making it like a cute nickname, or?
So it's one of the things that I do on the show, and I specifically ask people what they want to be called. Mm-hmm. And I practice saying their name even with them. Sometimes it'll end up as one of the outtakes at the end of the show. But I think that's something that's really important about understanding what they want to be called versus what is their printed name, what is the name that they go by professionally. So I think there are a few different layers, and I think it's about using the name that person feels most comfortable with. And it doesn't matter if it's recognized in the world. It doesn't matter if, it's not a legal name. I don't think any of that matters. I do think it's important to, and especially as we live in a global culture, to make sure that you are saying people's names right.
Yeah, I think that's, there are people though, when you first meet them, as soon as they hear your name, they make a nickname out of it. Not just you, Skipper, however, anyone in general.
They'll pick anyone, right?
Yeah.
Someone introduces themselves as James, they're like, hey, you'll become Jimmy. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I had an uncle. My name is Laura. I have never identified with the name Laura. It does not fit me in any way, shape, or form. It's a fine name. There's nothing wrong with it. I just don't identify with it.
I'm going to get angry letters from
from other Lauras.
Laura.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it just doesn't ever feel like me. It doesn't feel like who I am inside me. And I had an uncle who called me Lori, which also felt even worse than Laura. I was like, I'm definitely not Lori. If I'm not Laura, I'm certainly not Lori. Call me something else. So I like that you feel like that you sort of own your name, as long as I've known you, that you sort of own that piece of you.
Yeah.
So I want to jump back into the idea of creating this podcast, which is a version of storytelling for you. You're helping to tell other people's stories. What is one thing that you really hope to accomplish by putting this out in the world? What is something that you would feel really positive about as a result of creating this?
It's a really good question. This is one of those things where I believe that in your life you should approach things with some intentionality and have larger goals around them. For me, I think this podcast is about iteration, and it's about working on making each episode, each interaction with a guest better than it was before, right? Getting better, understanding all of the nuance, the moving parts, being a better listener. I will often circle back with someone that I've talked to on the show, and I will send them a note asking, do you have an idea around maybe one or two other people I could talk to on the podcast? As of right now, I have a very loose list of subject matters that I want to learn more about, and that might become more articulated over time, maybe in the midway through the second season or maybe in the third season. But the thing that I ask previous guests of the show is if they know someone who would be a good candidate to be on how this works. And, understanding that I'm not necessarily looking for people in this, and this subject matter. For instance, one of the things that I'd like to learn more about is around solar panels and solar arrays and how solar energy works, both in terms of how panels are manufactured, how they're optimized, all of those things. That's one example, one subject matter that I'm interested in learning more about. But it's more about people who know certain things in the world, and after you talk to them about this thing that they know about, your response is something like, huh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Or I'd like to learn more about that, right? It's that twinge of interest that happens when you talk to someone who knows something very deeply and positions it in a way that you'd never considered it before.
So you answered both questions. You answered the question in two ways. One, what you personally are hoping to accomplish and what you would want a listener to receive from this podcast. You want a listener to be able to learn something new or to become interested, to follow a line of curiosity.
For sure.
And to maybe even look at the world and the people around them with new eyes. Mm-hmm. Everyone has a story. Everyone is an onion.
Everyone has a story.
Everyone is compelling in some way.
Yeah.
Whether it's a good compelling or not so good compelling, sure. But
yeah.
So when you think about this, when you think about guests that you bring on, is there, other than asking previous guests if they have someone they'd recommend, how else do you go about finding guests for this show?
So I think for me, it's also about keeping my eyes and ears open in the world. Mm-hmm. My wife, Laura, is actually really good about bringing guests to me.
Is she?
She is.
Oh.
She's a really nice person. You should hang out with her more. And then I think I can include myself in this number. So I'll say we, in addition to other people, friends, family, previous guests, often people will circle back to me and say, hey, have you read this thing? In the same way that you share an article that you read. Mm-hmm. And sometimes what happens is that when I read that article, I might dig into one person who's quoted or the person who wrote that article. I think it comes from a variety of different sources. As of right now, the subject matters and the guests on the show are as a result of natural curiosity.
Okay. I
do believe that, if each season of the show is 20 episodes or so, and this stretches into 5 seasons, then I think that there will be moments where some of those things will be more intentional than others, and not these sort of accidental bumping into this subject matter and by proxy, this person who knows this subject matter.
So some of your guests, though, so far, and I know this, you've cold called, essentially.
That's right.
You read an article, someone told you about them, and you just reached out, and you were like, hey, I think you would be interesting to speak to. Mm-hmm. I'd like to hear more about you and how you speak on this subject matter.
That's right.
And you've actually received some positive response for that. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And there's a ratio, right? Of you go up for bat and you ask someone a question. I have yet to get any interest from any politicians that I've reached out to.
They're busy.
There's a lot of stuff going on. But Dr. Peter Chin Hung, he was the third episode. Where we talked about novel coronavirus and COVID-19 and PCH. He responded to just an email that I sent to his UCSF email.
Yeah.
Similar for Cassandra Carlopio. Mm-hmm. She's working on how we can sleep better and as a meditator. Sally McRae, the running, the endurance runner, professional endurance runner. Piper Payne, right? Her subject matter came out of an episode that I did with a friend of mine, Selena Rosenbaum, and we were talking about the process of recording her album, and she talked about recording it, mixing it, and mastering it. And she was able to articulate a little bit around mixing, but then when I asked her the question, well, what does a mastering engineer do? And she said, I honestly have no idea. And she's recorded multiple things in her life. She's recorded 2 full-length albums, among other things. And so then I went looking for someone like Piper Payne, and Piper Payne very graciously said she would talk to me.
And that is one of my favorite episodes.
That's a great episode. I'm already planning a part 2.
Yeah, Piper Payne is amazing. What an amazing guest. Yeah.
Yeah.
As all your guests I've enjoyed. Yeah, so that's a cool way that you... And is there, aside from solar panels, are there any subjects that are peaking for you right now? Just in case your listeners might have someone that they could recommend that you speak to. Or aside from solar panels, are there any other... So I know you've reached out to a lot of politicians, and I mean, this is a busy year for politicians.
This is a busy year, and I don't know that a politician would want to go on record with a small-ish, medium to smallish podcast. So some of the other, I have a running list, for instance, how coffee's made. The process of roasting and harvesting, and the idea of single origin versus mixing blends, or the economics of coffee farming.
Sure.
Similar for chocolate. I think there's a lot of ambiguity around how those two substances are produced.
Like the sisters from 21 Seeds, that was an incredibly informative show about the process of tequila infusion and just making tequila and how, and I didn't know that, like similar to champagne, that tequila is from a very specific region. Otherwise it's not tequila.
Idea. Otherwise it's not tequila. Yeah.
Let's do a shot. Happy early anniversary, by the way. Our anniversary is in two days.
Our anniversary is in 2 days. That's right.
I just wasn't sure what today was, so I knew I was close. I'm really tired.
How many years?
You're holding up fingers. 7, 9. We've been married 9 years?
We've been married 9 years.
Wow. That's pretty cool. That's very cool. We got married in Brooklyn Bridge Park, in between the Manhattan and the Brooklyn Bridge. It's very pretty. In front of Jane's Carousel. For anyone who has ever lived in New York or traveled, it is a beautiful park, and Jane's Carousel is a must-see. If you want to see some stunning photos of Jane's Carousel, you should look up when Hurricane Sandy hit. Because the carousel, the water came up, and it looked like it was floating. It was remarkable that it's still standing.
It's like 2012? No, was it after or before we were married?
It was after.
After. Okay, so like 2013, 2014.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure, yeah. We should look that up. We should.
We could probably fact check that. But,
we should probably fact check that.
But I think the process of trying to remember something, I think is more interesting. So
yeah,
we'll just say it's after we were married.
It was after we were married.
In 2012.
Yeah. We were married in 2012. That's why it's 9 years, because it's 2021. I mean, 2020 is sort of a lost year, so we can just celebrate 8
We can just celebrate 8.
Yeah. Right? So back to how this works and your storytelling abilities. Do you ever think...
I don't think my abilities are that stupendous, but I do think they are getting better. I am committed to continuous improvement.
You are a very good host. You are very enjoyable to listen to.
That's really all I was hoping for in recording this episode. So
that I would compliment you.
That's right.
Did you need a little ego pump today?
That's right.
I got you, babe. Don't worry. I like listening to you. I think you're a very good host of this podcast. One thing I was curious about, do you ever plan on expanding and occasionally having a guest host with you, or is that something in your future?
I'm definitely not opposed to that. It would have to be someone who... I'm not opposed to that.
I want to know more. So something that I'm going to divulge to your listeners may not be that interesting. It's making me think of an article I read about earlier today. When we moved to the Bay Area, and since this is sort of, we had an idea, we had a timeline here. However, like everything that happened from everything that's happened in the last year, I think everyone's timeline to what they were headed to before has probably shifted and changed drastically.
Right.
Is there anything else that has, in your timeline, in your in your own personal storytelling that has shifted and changed for you?
Is there anything in my own personal? I'm not going to be the first person to say this, but I think life changes, like getting married, having a child. I think that has shifted, because I don't know that it's a net change. It's not a 180 degree or 90 degree change, but it has shifted my perception and level of expectation around the events of life. Mm-hmm. I would hope that it's given me more patience and a little bit more grounding around why we do certain things. And then also this idea of having an opinion or an idea that you hold on to tightly, but then you let go of loosely, right? I think it's important to be committed to doing something in a specific way, but then to be flexible with the plan of how you do it.
I know with our child, like most children, curiosity is a theme for young children.
Right.
Because this is a rapid period. The timeline, my sister often says this, the timeline for being a child is so short. So it's like, so you're growing in leaps and bounds, and you just want to understand.
And in an average lifespan.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
In an average lifespan, it's very short. And
where would those ages be, from 0 to
18, probably?
So 18 all the way up to through adolescence to 18 for you?
I think you can consider childhood. For me, I would think I think 0 to 17, 18 is a good, even if you don't consider someone an adult till 21,
right?
Or if you're someone who says like by 17. So those 17 to 21, those are really transitional years where you're starting to find out, you're very beginning to start. I mean, I am very different than I was at 21 even. So I don't, even though I'm only 23 now, I mean, 2 years ago, I've changed a lot in 2 years.
It's the lost pandemic year.
That's right, my lost pandemic year. So I think that I do think like if you look at that, if an average lifespan, say like up to 75, the majority of your life is going to be spent as an adult.
Sure.
So I think that preservation of that timeline of childhood, because it's such an accelerated rate of growth during that time, I think that one thing I've noticed for you as a host is like, when our child asks about something like, what is this? Or why does this happen? It enables us to kind of revisit that span of our life and see things through these new eyes. And like, okay, you want to know more about that? Well, I do too. I want to know more about that. I don't even remember what that is or why that happened or what the name of that beetle was. Let's go find out together.
Right.
So I think how this works is sort of an example and an extension of that curious mind.
It's definitely born out of that. I remember something that they asked just the other day around the color of our veins. And, I said something around how, well, your blood's actually blue until you have a cut and that blood is exposed to oxygen. Well, what I learned in digging more into that subject matter is that is not true. Your blood is not actually blue. Now, is it exactly the bright red that it looks like when you cut yourself or you scrape yourself? No, it is a slightly different color. It is less oxygenated because it's in your body.
Right.
Especially if it's one of the veins
so when
and not the
hits
arteries.
the air, it becomes oxidized and turns, sure.
That's right. So it does become more red, but it's not as though your blood is blue. Your blood is reddish blue. So I think that's one of those things where when you start asking, and there are all sorts of like frameworks, questioning frameworks like the 5 whys, which was created by someone at the Toyota company once upon a time. And the idea is that when you ask the question why 5 times to a specific idea or a notion, then you will get down to the core piece of it, right? So why? Like a child would ask over and over and over, why this, why that? And sometimes as parents or adults in their world, we get frustrated and we just say something like, well, because it is the way it is, leave it alone.
Right. I'm tired. I'm busy.
That's right. We have any number of things.
You need to get in the bath. Come on, man.
That's right. So, but I think there is something to that notion of taking the time and making this space and making it safe, right? We've talked a lot about more recently in the world at large around how we can create safe spaces in our home or even in our work environment, whether that's around health, safety, and hygiene, or it's more about mental and emotional space. How can we make sure that people feel inclusive? And I think that's something that's super important. One other thing that I have learned in making the podcast is in listening week over week to the sound of my voice. Believe it or not, I am not someone who enjoys the sound of my voice. I am often very critical of the way that I sound.
You have a very nice voice.
So thank you. Be that as it may, one of the things that I've realized is how drenched our individual languages are with vocal ticking. Things like ums and
or clicking
likes,
your tongue.
clicking,
Sure.
other kinds of things that we do to physically ease some nervousness that we might feel. I have them. I've listened to them in other guests. We've gone through an editing process to take some amount of those out, not so much so hopefully that the conversation sounds unnatural. However, it is making me realize and actually making me think again, like I did when I was in high school, when I was on the speech and debate team, around how it is that I speak and how it is that I present myself out in the world.
That's nice.
So,
Although it is difficult to listen to yourself in general. Not you personally, but I'm like, wow,
And
Skipper, it must be hard to listen to yourself.
and
Woo!
there went that other compliment, just torpedoed that.
Speaking of vocal tics, how would you define success for yourself? What are some areas of your life that you feel successful in? And how do you, because success, we have a very, especially because we're drenched in media all the time. So the media that we're drenched in is telling us what success should look like and how we should feel about it. Where's an area of your life that you feel successful, and what does success feel like to you?
I think that you're right. I think that a lot of the celebrity profiles that we see or household name profiles that we see, it's about diagnosing their success and why they were successful. And I think sometimes it's...
Because people are looking for a template.
That's right.
They're
looking for a plan.
I want that. I want the vision of that life that I see. They don't see the real, like, wizard behind the curtain, so to speak. However, they want that vision.
That's right.
And they want a template on how they can achieve that.
Right. And I think that one of the things that, among others, Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in Outliers, where he talks about different people's success and around that notion of 10,000 hours of practice makes an expert of some degree, citing people like the Beatles or Steve Jobs or other folks who were in the right place at the right time to work on their craft and art or business or whatever it is enough that that's what they became known for, right? The Beatles played in clubs in Hamburg for years before they ever landed their first record deal. And so, in that same example of Black Sabbath recording their first album in one take, that doesn't take into account all of the work that they did before they ever walked into the studio.
Sure.
I think that for me, this idea of success, it feels very nebulous. I'm not sure what success looks like. I feel like one of those creative directors or one of those design clients who says, well, I can't articulate to you what this looks like, but I will know it when I see it.
Or you know what it feels like.
Or I know what it might feel like. But having said that, I also know that success is not dictated by the amount of money that you have in the bank. That can provide some amount of comfort and maybe confidence in the world and stability. Because for some of the positions that I've held in my professional life, there have been moments that I've been paid much better than I'd ever been paid before, but I was miserable.
Sure.
So I know that that's an amount of money is not a metric of success, but I do know that there are a collusion of other factors that come together to build that. I don't know what all of those things are, but
Is there an area of your life that you feel successful?
Is there an area of my life where I feel successful? I think in that I have a family, in you as my wife and our child. I feel like, and our crazy manic gendo of a dog.
Poor dog.
Poor dog.
Hot spots.
Going through hot spots right now, and we think that she may have sprained her. This is not funny. She may have sprained her tail. She
sprained her tail. It like hangs at half mast. It's really fucking sad.
And if anybody knows anything about gendos, is they're related to Shiba Inus, which are the smaller versions of their cousin, basically. And then the Akitas, which are much bigger. But they all have these curly tails that stick up, kind of like a handle. And for the last couple of days, we've noticed that our dog, her tail is not a handle right now. It's more like
it's like a wet mop.
Yeah, exactly. Like a broom. Droopy. Yeah.
She's sad.
So I do feel like, and maybe success isn't the right word, but I feel like in my home life, in my family life, I have willing partners in you, in my child. Your parents have been with us for over the last year, right? They came last March 2020.
They came a handful of days before everything shut down.
Before California specifically shut down. They are planning to exit in the next few weeks. And I do feel like they have been willing participants, mostly, sometimes unwilling in things that we do in our household.
They have been the butt of many jokes.
They have been. None of which we'll mention here for the sake of posterity and for the continued good in-law relationship that I have.
That's right.
So in that realm, I feel like there's some measure of success in that we have collaboration, we have cooperation, we have things that we move towards together.
We have fun.
We do. I think in my work, I suppose there's been a progression of responsibilities. I feel like the job that I'm currently in has a lot of room for growth, and I'm able to explore some of the areas that I'm really interested in, how to help designers be better at their work, right? The team dynamics, how to facilitate important conversations as you're working on a design engagement, right? Are we asking the right questions? Are we setting the right things into motion? Can we call a timeout and say, wait, this notion of looking back on the last 3 weeks, 3 months, whatever it is, and seeing what we need to continue doing, what we need to stop doing, that idea of reflection as a way of improving the work that we do. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, I may not, in a knee-jerk way, I may not categorize myself as successful, but I feel satisfied by many of the things that are happening.
That's a good answer. So as we come to a close, is there anything else that you feel that we didn't touch upon that you think is important for your listeners to know or to hear?
Well, you did incorporate a couple questions from listeners, but there was one that came in that I didn't notice immediately.
Okay. So this is a good question from a listener. Why color code versus alphabetize your books? Which is funny because I think depending on the area of the house, you do both.
Right. But the area in which I normally work in, and I recorded the call for questions, you can see the books in the background, and they go from light or white to dark and across the color spectrum.
Is that because you're a designer?
It's because I saw enough. So one of the functions of being in this remote meeting environment is that I have seen a peek into many people's work spaces, and I saw enough people doing that color coding. And so from an organizational perspective, I find the color coding super frustrating because
Because you like
of
to alphabetize everything.
that's right. So not only do I need to remember the name of the book because it's important, but then I need to remember what color that book is. So I've not done the thin slicing about alphabetizing all of the white books versus alphabetizing each color piece. So it's often frustrating for me to find a book very quickly that I want. It usually takes me a few extra minutes in order to remember what color that book is. And really all the books are sort of work-related books or more professional books. Most are design-related or business-related or something of that. And so those are only those books. And you are correct. In other parts of our house where we have bookshelves, most of those books are alphabetized by author.
Except for the children's books. They are often alphabetized, and within minutes, they are
Unalphabetized.
completely...
Well, and then we have certain shelves that can fit certain heights of books or certain depths of books.
Yeah.
And so, so they similarly are sometimes categorized by author, but then also by their height.
So size does matter.
Size does matter, yes.
So
When it comes to books.
when it comes to literature, remember that, everyone.
That's right.
Anything else that you feel like sharing that you think needs to be shared?
I do have a thought about the notion of being interviewed versus interviewing someone.
Okay.
In the same way that I think people that I have cajoled or talked into being, whether it was on Design Voices or Fika or even on How This Works, people who've been talked into being a guest have often said some version of, I don't know enough about this thing to talk about it.
Right.
I think in the same way, even though I'm a perfectly qualified human being in the world who does things for money and all sorts of other activities, that I also feel unqualified to answer someone's questions about a subject matter that I should know an awful lot about, being myself and or the work that I do. And like I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with being humble. I don't think that you should over exaggerate or posture yourself as an expert when you are not an expert. However, I do think that people in the world should own the thing that they know, which is why in the show, when we get into the subject matter discussion, that's why I ask the very pointed question, what is the subject matter or what is the topic that we're going to talk about that you know an awful lot about? And there have been some people who've pushed against that, saying, well, I don't know that I know much about it, or, saying it's hard to answer that question in that way. My friend Jake Kahana answered it in that way that I can recall. That's why I ask that question specifically, because I want the person that I'm talking to own the subject matter, because I think that they do, my opinion, I think they do know the topic extremely well.
I love Jake's episode as well.
That's a good episode.
Is there anything that you're super excited about right now? Is there anything that you can't stop listening to or watching or reading or...
The watching is not going to be surprising because a lot of the things we watch together.
That's true. Although I did fall asleep and I didn't know what you were watching the other night. I could hear it. I just couldn't keep my eyes open. What were you watching?
But I don't know.
It sounded like Kate McKinnon, but I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah. I was playing the Saturday Night Live. They did a sketch around the last year with everything that's been going on with COVID.
So it was Kate McKinnon.
It was Kate McKinnon.
So what is...
Oh, I didn't realize you fell asleep.
I didn't watch any of that. I just heard.
You just heard.
I vaguely heard voices and I was so tired. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Sometimes you put it on and I'm really excited about it and then I'm out like 30 seconds in.
It's one of your many superpowers is that you can fall asleep watching things.
I actually enjoy, I actually select certain things to watch to fall asleep to.
That's right.
Very helpful. John Wick, fan favorite. Matrix, really anything super action oriented with Keanu Reeves, I can easily, and that's not to, I love Keanu Reeves. I married you because you could be his doppelganger. I'm just kidding.
Are you?
So let's talk about, so what are things that are compelling to you in this time?
Sure. So we just started watching the Apple TV series, The Mosquito Coast, with Justin Theroux.
And we've had conversations. You did not see the film adaptation with Harrison Ford.
I did not.
You should. River Phoenix. It's good. Have you read the book?
I've not read the book. So this is all new to me.
And you're enjoying it's very tense. It's
very tense. They do a really good job of building suspense. I think we're 4 episodes in, and I don't know that we have a clear sense of...
I think we're like 3 1/4.
3 1/4, okay.
You finished the 4th one. I did not make it.
Your superpower might be falling asleep during TV and movies. One of my superpowers is staying awake.
There you go.
During TV and movies.
We're a good match.
Right.
Or... I remember you were so angry when we first started dating. When I asked, I was like, "Oh, can we put on Lord of the Rings?" You were like, "To fall asleep to? What is wrong with you?" And I was like, "Who doesn't? I mean, come on."
The director's cut is like 4.5 hours long.
You know, you're going to be out like 45 minutes.
You're going to be out.
Exactly. And I need to fall asleep specifically to loud action or sci-fi films. Go figure.
Right.
Tells you a lot about my childhood. So Mosquito Coast, are there any other podcasts that you're listening to?
Yeah, in terms of podcasts, one of the funny things about making a podcast is that the amount of time that you spend listening to podcasts drops.
It sure does, yeah.
Exponentially. Sure. And I would say that a lot of the podcasts that I listen to are pretty standard fare. Wireframe from Adobe with Koi Vin is a favorite of mine.
Okay.
They're getting into a lot of different subject matters.
That's cool.
Invisibilia from NPR is another favorite of mine. I think they go really deep into different veins of things that are happening in the world. 99% Invisible is always a fun one.
Is there any new music that you're really charmed by?
Adrienne Lenker. I really like what she's making in the world right now. I think with Prince passing away recently, a lot of the reissues that are coming out as a result of and his estate being more open to releasing things.
Okay.
Japanese Breakfast, someone that I'm listening to, a band that I'm listening to an awful lot. Someone that's on my to listen to list is Billie Eilish. She has a new album, but I just haven't gotten the chance to listen to it yet. And one band that I think the entire world is super into, but I haven't embraced them or really given them the chance that I think that they deserve, would be BTS.
Oh,
Huge
come on. I love BTS.
Yes. But for whatever reason, K-pop, C-pop, J-pop, all of the Asian pops, it just doesn't land with me in some palpable way.
Are you missing that part of your genetic code?
That might be part of it.
I mean, come on. Have you seen, you sent it to me.
The cover that they do of one of my least favorite bands, of Coldplay's
Fix You. It's so good.
It's amazing.
It's so good.
We'll link to it in the show notes. But
it's so good.
But it is a compliment to that band, and whether you want to point to K-pop being this machine that just cranks out, young idols who are trained to sing and dance in these really wonderful, compelling ways. Their performances out of this world. Blackpink, among many other K-pop bands.
Sure. There are so many that are so lovely. My next question would be, are any of these going to end up on a mixtape for me? Any of these new things you're listening to? Because for those of you who don't know, for the entire time that I have known Skipper Chong Warson, he has, even before we ever dated, he has made digital mixtapes, basically, playlists.
Although there were a few in the very beginning that were burned to CD.
They were.
Right.
Yeah. Cool art. Like you made your own cover art.
I cut out photographs or found other compelling, or even made, in some instances, some of those covers, and then made sure that the track list was typed out.
And I, because of that, for a present for him, which still, we still haven't actually created it, I ordered a custom vinyl for him of songs that basically playlist that were important to us. And we can link that in the show notes. The company that is making that, they're pretty sweet and incredible. So
sure. One of the things that I am listening to or reading is I'm rereading a book of short stories by Karen Russell.
okay.
And it's called St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves. And she is one of those authors that you read her work and it makes you a little bit angry because she writes so vividly and so descriptively that you can fully see what is happening in this world. And she's such a wonderful writer, and it makes me a little bit angry every time I read her.
You little jelly.
A little jelly.
All right. That's cool. I'm excited to read that after you.
Yeah.
So, Skipper Chong, thank you for sharing a bit of yourself with your listeners, as I think they would all like to get to know you a little bit better, and hopefully we have given them entrance into that.
Yeah. Thanks for making the time and space.
And thank you for listening to How This Works. Please follow or subscribe. Please leave Skipper a review wherever you get your podcast. This is a passion project of his, and therefore it is a passion project of mine as his partner. So please, please, please do leave reviews. Share this podcast with anyone you think that should listen, that would enjoy it. You can find How This Works online at howthisworks.show. 4 words, all letters. Again, that's howthisworks.show. If you're interested in knowing a little bit more about Skipper, you can also find him at skipperchongwarson.com. Send him a note, send him some ideas, send him whatever you want. And this show, How This Works, is active in all the places where social media happens. So I really hope that you learned something from my conversation with Skipper. I certainly did. I always learn something from Skipper. And we'll definitely talk again soon. Thank you.
I do think that people in the world should own the thing that they know, which is why the beginning of the subject matter discussion that I have with guests, I intentionally ask the question, that's outside.
I would hope
That's
so.
a truck.
I hope that's not inside. It's hard to take you seriously also because your microphone is pointed directly at your nose. So it looks like you have, like, instead of a big red nose, it looks like you have this. So
Fair. So that's